There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is your mountain. Hey, everybody. Welcome once again to another episode of the Your Mountain podcast. So I'm your host tonight, David Wilms. The whole crew is here. Nephi Cole, sitting to my right. How are you doing?
I'm doing excellent. You know what I'm excited about?
Your Red Monster energy drink.
Or the white one.
I'm so excited about this podcast tonight that I've got a Red Monster, Red Blood, blue jeans. I'm wearing Cayman boots tonight because of tonight's topic, and my Hunt Public t-shirt. I'm ready to go.
Holy smokes. Well, I'm wearing a Spokane, Washington Hoop Fest t-shirt because that's what came out of my dresser. It's not super old.
Could you not kill my buzz?
I'm sorry. I don't know what to say. Mike McGrady. Long time no see on the podcast front.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, hey. Hello.
Hey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm happy. I've got my antelope license. I got in the mail today.
Oh,
nice.
So I'm happy about that. Did you get yours, Dave?
I didn't. I haven't checked the mail.
Yeah.
But
I checked
sure
the mail
it's
today,
there.
and I was like, yes, my antelope license.
I
already got my deer, so.
I've been waiting for that tag for a while.
Yeah. This is actually going to be the first time I've hunted antelope.
So we got to talk about deer offline, but I'll just tell you why. So my wife has told me that I have to go to a wedding with her during deer season, to which I said a lot of things that I can't repeat on this
Yes, dear.
on this podcast.
Yeah, yes,
followed
dear.
by yes, dear. But let me coordinate with Mike because I know that we have a hunt scheduled with our daughters, and we got to figure out when we can.
Yeah, right.
When he's available, I'm hoping
This
that
is the makeup year, so we can take
I
our
know.
kids.
I'm hoping that you're only available when this wedding occurs.
Well,
so that I will be forced to join you for the good of our children.
yes, I understand. It depends on which spot we're going to.
I've never even met these people getting married.
I know,
I
but
don't know. I couldn't tell you their names right now if you asked me, if you put me on the spot, held a gun to my head and was like, this is it. You got one guess, or you're going down. I don't have a clue who these people are.
Are they going to have one of those chocolate fountains?
Well, what
'Cause you
matters
should
to
go.
me, what matters to me on the scheduling of the weekend is whether I get first shot or not. That's what matters to
Depends
me.
on how fast
You
you
just
are on the
take
trigger. I think that's sort of how it works.
Yeah. Well, or if you want to get out of a wedding, you will sit on your hands.
I like this. Well played, Mike. Well played.
Let's just hope she doesn't hear this strategy.
Yeah, I know.
Suddenly you're shooting
I
second.
don't think she's ever listened to this podcast.
That's probably a good thing.
Yeah, so that was a little bit of a tangent. But we're going to talk about, I'm super fired up.
You know, go ahead. Yeah, go.
Can we get into it?
Are you going to tell your story first?
No, I'll tell it when we get into it.
Oh, okay.
When it makes sense to tell it.
All right. Let's talk.
All right.
Tell them what we're talking about.
Okay. So I'm fired up tonight about a whole bunch of stuff. And so I'm kind of amped. I'm not even on Monster energy drinks or anything. There is just a crazy amount of stuff going on. And I'm really emphasizing the word crazy. Maybe I shouldn't say it that way because we try really hard to provide multiple perspectives on this and shoot down the middle. So I'll back off a little bit.
Sometimes it's tough
Cray.
to get on the same side as cray though.
But this
Let's
one's
be
gonna
honest.
this
like
one's
you're like,
hard
hey,
for me.
let's try and understand things from that perspective, and you're like, nope, doesn't work.
So it's
Because
hard.
there's no logic.
It's hard for me. So here's the deal. We're gonna talk about two things tonight. Three things really, but two are related to the same topic. So we're gonna talk about grizzly bears, and we're gonna talk about hunting in Africa.
Awesome.
Simple enough, right?
Cecil.
Sure, simple.
Simple enough. But we're not going to talk about, we're not going to go into a big, this isn't your grandma's grizzly bear discussion.
Nope.
Right. There have been a lot of grizzly bear discussions about Yellowstone grizzly bears and, the Northern Continental Divide, the Glacier National Park grizzly bears, and the saga around trying to get those populations delisted. This isn't that. This is, you need to know, listeners, what's going on in the grizzly bear world on the congressional level and on the litigation side. So where should we start? You guys pick. Like, draw a straw. Do we want to start the congressional side, or do we want to start with the lawsuit?
Let's start with the lawsuit, and let's just hammer through it, because it's not really. Let's not spend all day talking about all the.
No,
go.
Yeah. Okay.
It's not as cool as Africa.
Right, but so when I say grizzly bear lawsuit, most of the time you're thinking, oh, somebody else is suing over Yellowstone grizzly bear delisting, something like that, right? And if I'd been saying it now, you'd probably think that, because briefing is going on in that Yellowstone grizzly bear case. In fact, it may be coming to a close here pretty soon. I don't know. On that appeal in the Ninth Circuit. This isn't about that. This is Center for Biological Diversity at the end of June filed a lawsuit in Montana Federal District Court in front of Judge Christensen, who incidentally is the same judge who heard the Wyoming grizzly bear delisting case.
Strange coincidence.
In the district court. I'm sure this is coincidental.
Plus Wolverines, plus a couple other cases.
There couldn't possibly have been
any
forum shopping here.
Nobody
at
does
all.
that.
No, it never happens. Nothing. And I mean, we were pretty clear that you can understand the sarcasm there, right?
We talked about it on another episode.
That came through.
It wasn't the gerrymandering one. If it was, you should all go back and listen to that.
Please, because we're just not getting a lot of downloads on that one.
Go ahead.
What do you guys say?
It was an interesting topic, Mike. So, Center for Biological Diversity filed a lawsuit in this court involving grizzly bears. And so when a species is listed around, and it doesn't have to happen at the same time, it can happen years after, but the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will often, I'm not going to say typically because about a third of species don't have one, but often write a recovery plan to facilitate and encourage the recovery and ultimate delisting of the species. Right. So when grizzly bears were listed in 1975, shortly thereafter, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service put together a recovery plan for delisting grizzly bears.
Says this is how we're going to do it. This is how many we're going to need. This is where they're going to need to be.
Yep, that sort of thing.
Yep. This is very important later on in lawsuits and such, people, because remember, there's like an element of good faith here.
Right. So that happened. The recovery plan was amended in 1993. Updated in 1993. We're not going to go into all the details. We don't have the time to go into all the details of the recovery plan. But in short, the recovery plan identified 6 recovery areas for grizzly bears in the lower 48, all of them in Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, and Washington State. That's what you need to know right now. I think that's fair enough. If you guys think we should know more about it, we can go into more detail, but I think that covers it. That's what the recovery plan wanted, or the 1993 amended recovery plan. That's what it laid out. When grizzly bears were delisted on 2 separate occasions in the greater Yellowstone area, obviously those delistings have not survived judicial review to date, but when those were delisted, the 1993 recovery plan was amended. There were supplemental recovery plans in 2007 and 2017 for that population of grizzly bears to address the new science and the new recovery criteria and that sort of thing. Right?
Good faith.
What Center for Biological Diversity alleges, and there's they have a whole host of claims, but what Center for Biological Diversity alleges is that at some point the Fish and Wildlife Service had made agreements to, or had committed, I shouldn't say made agreements, but had committed to reevaluate or even evaluate for the first time if there were other areas outside of those 6 recovery units, if there were other areas that might have suitable habitat and might make sense for additional grizzly bear recovery in the lower 48 states. So Center for Biological Diversity is suing and saying, first of all, service, you, and I'm not gonna hit all the points of their complaint. I'm gonna hit a couple of highlights. Nutshell.
Okay.
One, every 5 years you should be revisiting. You should do a status review on the species and then revisit the recovery plan every 5 years, and you haven't done that, so you're violating the act. So you need to do that. But the biggie was you need to go back and take a look at these other places that might be suitable, might have suitable habitat, and be suitable for grizzly bear reintroduction. Some of those places, for folks that might not know, and I'm going to miss some of them. I don't have this in front of me. You can verify. I don't have any notes on this right now. I'm just trying to remember everything I've read about it. But places like the San Juans in Colorado, southwest Colorado, the Gila in New Mexico, Grand Canyon in Arizona, the Uintas in Utah, parts of Nevada. I'm trying to remember all the states. I think there were even other places in Oregon and Washington, maybe even California. All of these places identified as I think that's a bit. All these places identified by Center for Biological Diversity as places that might be suitable habitat. So that's what they want. They have a lawsuit, and they want the service to redo that recovery plan.
Did they file something with the agency first before they brought this lawsuit?
They did. They petitioned the agency back in 2014, I think, and the agency
was it a petition for a recovery plan in these areas.
It was. Well, it was a. I don't know if it's technically. I don't know if they called it a petition, but it was a request for rulemaking for an amended recovery plan, and I think the service responded by saying, recovery plans aren't regulatory. They don't go through APA. And so there's no mechanism for you to ask for us to do this. And so they denied that request back then.
In 14?
In 14. And so, they did try going through the agency first on this in a prior administration.
Right. And so is this lawsuit you failed to take an action kind of lawsuit?
It is. I mean, it's you should have done a status review, and you failed to do so. You should have amended your recovery plan as a result of that status review, and you failed to do so. And I think trying to establish, one of the things they want to establish is that recovery plans are subject to APA.
Okay.
So they're seeking not a true declaratory judgment on that, but they're making that they're making that claim that recovery plans should be subject to APA. That the denial in 2014 on the basis that they're not subject to APA was
the Administrative Procedures Act.
Correct. Violated the ESA. And so that's the, I'm not going to wonk out any more on it than that.
That's good.
But I do want to take it to that next step of saying, okay, what does that mean?
Yeah, why would they do that?
Why would they do that?
Right about the time that somebody is doing a nationwide delisting for wolves.
So
very strange.
So I have this huge, my conspiracy hat is on, right? So I've got my theories, and they might be proven wrong. Mm-hmm. So there are a few things that the reasons behind this lawsuit could be. One, pure altruism on their behalf.
Which seems par for the course for that group.
As in, they want to see biodiversity reestablished everywhere. Mm-hmm. Grizzly bears, they want to see reestablished everywhere, and they really do want to see recovery plans that allow for these recovered populations, or they want recovered populations in all of these places before delisting. The second possibility is exactly what you alluded to, this gray wolf delisting. So we've talked about it on this podcast a couple episodes ago. There's a Fish and Wildlife Service's proposed delisting gray wolves nationwide. Perhaps, huh?
I Googled.
Pointing at a picture of a flying squirrel.
So there was a DC Circuit opinion that came out. It was sort of hitting in my mind that DC Circuit Judge Ginsburg had written an opinion on the flying squirrel because the recovery plan was at issue. Mm-hmm. So Judge Sullivan out of the district court had ruled that the Interior violated the ESA by not complying with a recovery plan before delisting. And the D.C. Circuit said, nah, you don't have to do that. It's not regulatory.
It was Ginsburg that did it, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, that's exciting.
Not Ruth Bader.
Dang it.
Different Ginsburg.
Yeah, circuit court. Okay.
So that was just sticking in my head, and I was like, I swear that I remember seeing something saying that they were not regulatory. But this is a lawsuit filed in Montana, which is the Ninth Circuit rather than the D.C. Circuit. So we'll see.
That's true.
All right.
Okay, well,
that's why I off screen, pointed at a flying squirrel.
But it does confirm what the Obama administration
said. They did the right thing based on their
analysis was confirmed by the D.C. Circuit. Right?
Yep.
But take another run at it with the Trump administration here. But it's worth pointing out that we're talking about two administrations looking at it similarly.
Correct.
Anyway, so that second theory, this nationwide wolf delisting. So my other theory, or the second theory, is they want to get ahead of a potential grizzly bear nationwide delisting proposal. Right? And one way of doing that is having a court say you got to go back and evaluate your recovery plan and potentially take into account
all these other areas.
And in which case, then it would be a very long time before we could have a nationwide delisting rule if you had to have a recovered population in the San Juans and Grand Canyon and all these other places.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Because grizzly bears are not wolves. You could dump in some wolves tomorrow and they'd be recovered in 5 years. Grizzly bears take a long, long time. They're a very slow, biologically reproducing
But it would take a long
species.
time to write a recovery plan.
So that's the third piece.
Yeah.
Right. So the third piece is, or the third tin hat theory, on my behalf, is that this actually, you can point this right back to the greater Yellowstone area. And you're going to have a decision out of the Ninth Circuit sometime in the next year, probably. I don't know how long it's taking them to issue opinions these days, but I would anticipate once briefing is done and they have an argument, you'll probably see an opinion within 6 to 9 months, but it could take longer. Mm-hmm. Who knows? Anyway, what this could do is say it could be another way to say you can't, Fish and Wildlife Service, you can't write a new rule to delist grizzly bears in the greater Yellowstone area yet, because first you have to rewrite the recovery plan, and that recovery plan may have, when you do that, you have to look at recovery everywhere and for grizzly bears because they were listed nationwide in the lower 48, which would require looking at that greater Yellowstone area again and perhaps updating the recovery objectives and the science, and it could lead to a
Can I just say,
Mike's shaking his head. He's like, I know what this means.
I know. It's just I shake my head anytime I hear a failure to comply with a legal maxim unmoored from scientific basis. That if you just kind of looked at things, you're like, okay, all right. So I know we delist. We originally were thinking nationwide about grizzly bears. Okay, maybe there weren't grizzly bears everywhere nationwide at the time, but okay, we're gonna have to use that standard now legally. And they're not going to be recovered in the Keys, the Florida Keys. You know what I mean?
You know what? I love that you said that, because one of the things that bothered me when I read their complaint is an analogy that they were making frequently. They were saying grizzly bears only exist in 2% of their historic range, and because of that, and there are only 2,000 of them, or roughly, in the lower 48, and because of that, because they're not everywhere that they could be, they're not recovered and shouldn't be delisted. And it made me think, man, elk were everywhere.
Yeah.
Elk were, and they're not.
Yeah.
They're nowhere near what their historic range was. And you can say that for mule deer. You can say that for sage grouse. You can say that for, I'm just saying there's a
historic range is it's a slippery slope.
It's a very slippery slope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This brings about a great dichotomy in how you conserve and recover species that deserves to be talked about and understood. And it's one of the bigger problems with the Endangered Species Act is when you only, you've heard the analogy, when the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, with the Endangered Species Act, we've all heard the term shoot, shovel, and shut up. And when you have these animals that you are trying to recover, And you have them in places where where people feel like having that animal around is always going to be punitive. It's always going to be negative. It becomes very difficult to recover that animal the way that you could otherwise. Take elk as another great example. So elk, who doesn't want to have elk around? Everybody wants to have elk around. They might run through your fences. They might eat your haystacks. But in general, it's very popular.
They're popular, but they are controversial in places.
Yeah. I have a friend who lives up in Park County who has a ranch on the South Fork. And we were talking about recovering
Park
grizzly
County,
bears.
Wyoming.
Yes, Park County, Wyoming.
East of Yellowstone.
And has, grizzly bears running through his place all the time. And he was talking about the difficulty of living with grizzly bears. And the biggest difficulty was this. And we were talking about raising cattle and how difficult it is when the bears come in and eat your cows and eat calves and rip up a barn and whatever else. And I said the reality is, and he confirmed this, if he knew that he can keep doing what he's doing, he can stay on that ranch, he can live with the bears, they can coexist, there can be hunting, there can be these other things, as long as he would ranch bears if that would keep him on his place.
I've heard that. I've heard that line a lot. That I'll raise anything if it'll let me stay out here.
And that's a reality. But when conservation of the species is viewed as punitive, when there's not a way for the people living on the ground with those animals to be able to coexist in a way where they can still have a life, we're going to see negative. We're going to see shoot, shovel, and shut up. Unfortunately, that's going to be a dark side.
I lack imagination on how you raise a grizzly bear other than hunting, right? You have access, you have outfitting for hunting and things like that. So, would that even be palatable with a delisting?
Well, and I don't.
Yeah. So both of these things, I think, transition beautifully into the other grizzly bear topic that I wanted to talk about tonight. Right. One, the idea of hunting. Two, the idea of the punitive nature of some, air quoting, conservation. Right, the punitive nature of it. So there was a bill introduced, and this actually was introduced in May, but it's just timely to talk about it now. And let me start off by saying I don't think this bill is going anywhere, but it's the fact that it got a hearing in Congress that makes me uncomfortable that it's even part of the conversation. So here's what happened. The chairman of the House Natural Resources Committee is a gentleman by the name of Raul Grijalva. He's a Democrat from Arizona.
Now remember, everybody used to love to hate the former chair, who was Rob Bishop from Utah,
who's now the minority, the ranking member.
Yep.
Excuse me.
So go ahead. But now it's Grijalva.
So he introduced a bill, and I want to find the name of it. I might not get the name right. So if I don't get the name, here it is. It's the Tribal Heritage and Grizzly Bear Protection Act, H.R. 2532. So here's the deal. Pretty simple what this bill proposes to do. It would ban hunting and other grizzly bear take except in self-defense, and limit predator management activities that could affect grizzly bears on public lands.
So basically, it's no hunting bears, period.
It's what it's saying is if and when grizzly bears lose their protected status under the Endangered Species
They're recovered.
Act, they're recovered. They're recovered species. They're no longer warrant being listed as threatened anymore.
They're recovered. I just made that statement. Let's just say once they're legally recognized as being recovered.
Well, what we know is a portion of them are recovered, right? We know because the Fish and Wildlife Service has tried twice to delist
under different administrations.
Different administrations to delist the Greater Yellowstone area grizzly bear population. It's met all of its recovery objectives. We're not going to go into detail. We all around this table agree that population meets the definition of recovered under the Act, should be delisted. There are other populations that don't yet. They're not there yet. Hopefully they'll get there. But what this would do, this bill would say, okay, that population gets delisted, still can't hunt it. It bans hunting the delisted, the recovered population. So when it loses its protections from the Act, it effectively maintains all the take prohibitions that applied under the Act forever. So this bill, there's no better way to say it, strips management authority from the states and says, states, we don't trust you to manage the bears in a way that aren't going to be listed again. Oh, and by the way, we actually,
we're actually not going to let this tool.
Well, it doesn't. Hunting. Well,
it's putting them in it's creating a new class of in some ways of wildlife, right? New class of
protected animals.
Not
protected because of they are threatened or endangered, but just protected because we want to protect them.
Because the public, or at least the voting members of Congress that are voting on behalf of their constituents, make a decision that we shouldn't, for some moral reason, should not be hunting this species. Right? That's this bill as a hunter and a believer in the North American model of wildlife conservation. This bill fundamentally scares me because if you're going to do it for grizzly bears,
why not something
what's next?
Else? Right? Yeah, it's a first. It's the first cut.
Now I'll reemphasize. I don't think this bill's going anywhere. It had its hearing. It's not going anywhere yet. It's not going anywhere now. But it's something to be aware of. It's something to know that you've got elected officials out there pushing for something like this.
You've got the chairman of the House Natural Resources
of the United States Congress.
Yeah, who is pushing for
saying this is a priority of mine.
Yeah. And that's the same guy who, before, talk about permanent reauthorization of LWCF. This is one of the challenging things, you like that?
Yeah.
About being a hunter today is because everybody before loved to kick sand on Rob Bishop. Now he's your backstop. And it shows the short-sightedness when you're dealing with political issues of, attacking somebody all the time and not having a relationship where you can proactively talk with individuals in a courteous manner so that they'll answer the phone next time you want to call. Because now, if you want to fight a bill like this, who are you calling?
Ghostbusters
or Rob Bishop. That's the office that you're calling to work with on these issues. And so you have to maintain these relationships.
Well, I hope you call a lot more than Rob Bishop's office.
Sure.
This is one where, like I said, I don't think it's going anywhere, but I also think that the voices of the sportsman's community on something like this need to be heard. Like there needs to be a message has to be sent. This is, this isn't the biggest deal, Bill. It's just a big deal in the fact that it's being talked about, that it had a hearing, and that it's the first step in gaining more momentum. And it's just this, I don't know. I fear about the death by 1,000 cuts for the hunting community. And this is the type of bill that starts, making those cuts, right?
Well, it's another example where you're looking at popular opinion from some groups to make decisions that should be made in a scientific manner. And the North American model of wildlife conservation has been effective. And you have to have faith in these local populations, whether it be states or whether it be countries, to be able to manage wildlife under their purview. Because if you take that away from them, you take away the incentive for conservation.
But here's the other thing, too. Why do you need it? If the fear is we don't trust the states, we're afraid that the states are going to take over management and drive these species back to the brink, right? You know what? We still have the Endangered Species Act. There's still provisions under that. If the states don't do their job that we know they're going to do, because I've said it multiple times that no species ever delisted due to recovery has been relisted, which tells you states can do a pretty good job of managing wildlife. But if for some reason the population slides, you don't need a bill like this to prevent hunting. The thing that'll prevent hunting is they'll get relisted as a threatened species under the Endangered Species Act.
Well,
that's your wildlife backstop. This bill seems
to be more about the species and the biology of the status of the species. It seems like it has to do more with we just don't want hunting of the species, right? It doesn't matter how many.
They're making a moral judgment.
Yeah,
I'm going to be honest.
For a variety of reasons.
There's a certain amount of elitism and ignorance in thinking that even though you don't understand the same things as the people in a given state or a given area, you're better equipped to make decisions on those landscapes, those locations, those wildlife populations, and the people who live with them. And it doesn't just happen in the U.S. with the ESA and states. This is something that we also, right? We tend to look even in other continents and decide that we know best, and we're going to tell people how they should manage their own countries.
It's like you almost wanted to segue into the next topic.
It's as if I did.
It's as if you did. And it's
because I did.
Because you did. And we mentioned at the beginning of this, we were going to talk about hunting in Africa. And what we're going to talk about is we're going to continue talking about Raul Grijalva here from Arizona. Because not only did he have this grizzly bear bill, he also introduced a bill very recently and held a hearing on it. I'm gonna say the bill title because this is, I don't know about you guys, but it's like it almost gets comical when new bills are introduced and how they have to have some sort of an acronym that says something, and so you have to get all the right words with all the first
Just
letters,
say
right?
it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's what the staffers do because they
get bored or they're
some
they're told.
Some Grijalva staffer deserves
so here it is.
Twinkie for getting this one.
Conserving Ecosystems by Ceasing the Importation of Large Animal Trophies Act, otherwise known as the Cecil Act. Why would it be called the Cecil Act? Scratch my head for a second. Why would it be called the Cecil Act?
Everybody knows.
Everybody knows. We probably don't have to talk about that lion that was killed.
Yes, a lion that was killed by a dentist.
Yeah.
So if you're a dentist,
so here's the deal.
Don't hunt. Take pictures.
This bill does a couple of things, and I want to explore it a little bit. So let me break it down into two things, and we'll take off from there. So. First thing the bill does is it would ban importation on species and that are listed as either threatened or endangered under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. It would prohibit the importation of those species into the country, unless that government can show and it can be verified by the Secretary of Commerce or the Secretary of Interior that hunting of that species in that country furthers the conservation.
Well, that seems reasonable.
Right? Maybe it's something we've already thought of and do.
It seems like something we should have already done.
Oh, isn't there a law on that?
There might be a law on that.
Okay.
We do already do that.
Oh,
That's
man,
why
that
it
happens.
sounds familiar.
Yeah. Did you know? Did you know that... That took you back to the 80s, didn't it?
It did. I just now have a shooting star flashing in my eyes. Did you know?
The more you know.
The more you know.
Yeah. Yeah. But did you know there are species listed in Africa right now, today, that are listed as threatened under the U.S. Endangered Species Act? A lot of you might not have known that, actually. A lot of people, it surprises people when I tell people that, yeah, we actually list species in other countries. Well, what authority do we have to do that? We can do whatever we want. We can't tell them what to do, but we can tell our citizens
that they can't.
We can't tell our citizens that they can't go there and hunt that threatened species that we've listed, but we can tell them they can't bring any parts back with them.
Yep. And we do that right now.
We do, but the other thing we do right now is we actually allow importation of parts from certain species that we have listed. Yeah. So my point is,
but why?
Because we have confirmed, or working with those foreign governments, we have determined that they're putting money on the ground for conservation of that species, so that there's a direct benefit from our citizens going and hunting those species in that country, and that benefit is on the ground conservation. It could be things like preventing large savannas from being turned into agriculture, keeping it, wide open habitat. Yeah. There's all sorts of things that could be
because
financial.
we have verified,
there is
capital, there are resources as a result of this hunting that is occurring,
Yeah.
this management that is occurring, that is directly conserving that species and leading to that species making a recovery.
And in fact, we've done the opposite too. We've actually, with elephants in a couple of countries in Africa, we actually went through a phase where we banned the importation of those parts because we felt like the governments, we couldn't verify that there was a conservation benefit, that the money wasn't being siphoned off to other purposes, or that it was really furthering conservation of elephants. And then a couple of years went by and we could re-verify that was occurring. And then we allowed the importation again.
Yeah, and there was incentive in that country to make sure those governments and those people working in that, there was enough financial incentive where they missed the people coming in, they missed the cash inflow enough that they said, let's fix this.
Yeah. So the point is we actually have a mechanism right now that does a lot of what this bill aims to do. I suspect the objective here is to make that process more restrictive, more onerous. So, more hoops to jump through, more things, more boxes to check to verify that the resources are going to on the ground conservation. I suspect that's probably the case, but there are mechanisms there. The other piece of this bill, and this piece raises a red flag for me. And look, I'm not an African hunter. I've never been to Africa to hunt. I don't have any real opinions one way or the other, but I do have an opinion about this piece. It would also ban the importation of species that are proposed for listing under the Endangered Species
So there's
Act.
not even...
and it does not define what proposed
Yep.
means. And under the Endangered Species Act, you're not proposed, you're a candidate. And I guess you can be proposed too.
So it's not just anybody petition for it.
Well, so that's the question.
Yeah, because that would
Is
be pretty
petitioning
easy.
then propose? So I would argue in the context of the ESA that a proposed species would be one that has gone through its 12-month finding, and the service has said this warrants listing, and they either say it warrants listing as threatened, it warrants as endangered, or it's warranted but precluded. In each one of those cases, I would say that is proposed. Potentially, maybe for sure the first two, maybe not the candidate species.
Well, you could read it to be a proposed rule.
But here's
right? Another step further.
Well, but here's that was going to be my point. Is you have the 12-month finding, and under the ESA, they make that determination, but then they have another year to write the final rule.
Right.
Another 12 months, and in that 12 months, that determination can change, and that's happened before. It happened with dune sagebrush lizard. It happened, or sand dune, whatever that stupid little lizard is. I shouldn't say stupid.
Beautiful lizard
that I've never seen. The dunes sand dunes.
Let's
whatever.
move on.
Anyway, it also happened with wolverine. So there are a number of species where the service might say, "Yep, warranted." And then something happens in the intervening 12 months and they determine not warranted. So that could have been a proposed species. The point is, in that 1 year, when it's a proposed species, it is still under state management. It is not under federal jurisdiction at all. So now you have a bill that's saying if you have a species that's proposed for listing, and granted, we're not talking about stateside, this is international, but...
You're on the cusp of listing.
You're on the cusp, but it doesn't necessarily have to end in a listing. And it's not officially listed, but now we're saying the importation ban applies not only to listed species, but species that aren't listed yet as well.
I think
but might be soon.
It's worth noting like how funny, how ludicrous the title of the thing is, the conserving ecosystems. Because not only is the bill not benefiting ecosystems at all, it's going to be undermining the very programs that conserve the most habitat in Africa. It's going to be taking those programs away in Namibia, South Africa, Tanzania, Zambia, Zimbabwe. I mean, it's doing the opposite of what they wanted to do. And I think that this is a tough thing for us hunters in our country sometimes to wrap their heads around, because there are people, Western hunters who are going to say like, oh, well, hunting in Africa. And quite frankly, when I talked about elitism, there are some of us, American hunters, who look down our noses at hunting in Africa. We kind of are like, oh, well, I don't know if I'd hunt in Africa. But remember, we have the North American model. We do it our way. in those countries, the way that they have developed their model of hunting and management, that works for them. That's conserving those species. And yes, it's not the same way that we do it here, and it's not the same people, but it's quite hypocritical for us to say, to look down our noses at those countries and how they have chosen to manage their game, and quite frankly, at other hunters who choose to go over there and hunt, and to kind of like make value judgments based on what my moral is versus what they need to do.
We also need to be careful about lumping all of Africa together.
For sure.
Right, because
it is not all the same.
Because it is not all the same, right? Africa's a gigantic continent with a lot of different countries, some with more stable governments than others, some that are more conservation-minded than others. And there was some testimony during this hearing on this bill that was actually relatively compelling from somebody from the University of Minnesota, who his comment was, trophy hunting, you really need to evaluate it on a case-by-case basis. And he pointed out that places like Namibia, for example, South Africa and Zimbabwe, said that their sport hunting, their trophy hunting enterprise has been very successful in protecting wildlife, and so he spoke pretty highly of it. But then at the same time said, but you could look at some places like Mozambique or Tanzania or Zambia, and some of the government-run hunting reserves have not been managed very well. And that's the type of thing that we all my point is, yeah, we should look at each country differently, and we do, and we already have the mechanism to do that. Mm-hmm. And this seems like taking an unnecessary pot shot at some of these countries and
you're taking the
choices that they've made for how to manage wildlife in their countries.
You're taking a sledgehammer to try and fix this issue rather than the scalpel that you need.
Yeah. So quickly, we've mentioned that there are already existing laws on it. Just what are a couple of those laws that jump in and do kind of the same things as the Cecil Act?
Well, the Endangered Species Act is one of them. Mm-hmm. And I knew so I'm trying to get the right, so CITES.
Correct.
CITES. But I was trying to get the actual
IUCN.
acronym.
Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Flora and Fauna.
So those are the two biggest.
The two biggest ones, right?
That do that.
Just wanted to mention them.
Don't want to steal your word, but this is complicated.
That's not my word. Mine is challenging.
Yeah.
So have you had now, Dave? You've worked with You've worked on these issues. You worked with
I have
Safari Club International, right? Am I wrong on this?
I didn't work for them.
No, you provided.
I served on a legal task force, legal committee. But I think what you're getting at, it actually isn't related to that.
Well, I'm just trying.
So when I was in, I have some interesting perspective just from my legal practice. Right? Mm-hmm. I've never hunted in Africa.
Maybe before you get there, let's just say this. Hunting is a benefit to the conservation of species. If it's done right.
If it's done, yeah. Yep.
Now that's important.
So hunting very well maybe that's the way to put it. Hunting very well can be.
It's the best tool that's out there if managed correctly. You can't find, because again, you're allowing conservation of a species occurs because you're allowing the species to pay its own way. And that's just a reality that you have to find. There has to be an incentive for people who are living with these species on the ground. There must be an incentive for living together. You have to have that. Whether it's, whatever that incentive is, it needs to be there. If people are living with, a bad neighbor and it's always, you're never going to be happy about that because you haven't built some kind of a, way to live together. It doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And in our country, we've done a very good job through the North American model of providing incentives for conservation and then a management scheme. And that incentive, some of it, for us, that incentive is being able to go out and hunt them. And that's, it's being able to go out and see them every day. It's living in the same communities. It's preserving the habitat because it helps so many other things. These incentives are there. And and they're there in Africa too. If you don't have incentives, you can't fix all these issues that you want to by creating negative consequences and penalizing everything. At some point, it doesn't work anymore.
Yeah. And I want to do one thing really quick, and then I got to tell this story. I don't want to be seen here as advocating for hunting threatened species, species that are on the brink of extinction. All right. In many, many cases, and perhaps in most cases, certainly under North American model, there are very few examples of where hunting a threatened species would enhance the conservation of that species. You can find examples. I'd actually argue that grizzly bears might be one of them. But that's for another day, right? So I don't want, my frustration with some of these bills, I don't want it to be viewed as I'm out here as a proponent of hunting threatened species. What I'm saying is we need to be aware of the fact, like we've talked about, that we hunt in a very unique system. We live in a very unique wildlife management system. And the system that's used in a large part of the world, including in these African countries, is a very, very different system than the one that we use. And perhaps in some of those countries, without the influence of hunting, even on a threatened species, it might put the species in more peril. Not in every case. And that's why you have to take a real hard look. And that's why it is necessary for our federal agencies to take a really hard look at how these countries are managing these species before they make a determination on whether or not to allow importation of these parts of a species we've deemed threatened. Right? But there might be opportunities because until you live it, you just. And I don't live it. None of us do that African system. But we do know that it's very different. And we do know that 80% of trophy hunters in Africa come from the United States. So any policy decision that we make here about importation of these parts in the United States really will have some kind of an impact in these countries. And we have to decide, is that impact going to benefit the species or not?
So, I'm going to challenge you a little bit on this. And that's and I'm not challenging what you're saying about we shouldn't hunt. There are some species, yes, you have to look at that on a case-by-case basis and define, based on your population objectives, the age of the population, the type of individual that you're looking at taking out of the population. All those things come into play. But where I do want to challenge you is this. Is as we look, we need to look at it. Our country needs to, that's a really, really dicey area to go into, to say that our country needs to decide what's best for another country.
No, that's not what I'm saying. No, I'm saying before we make a determination about whether we're going to allow our citizens to import wildlife from that country, we need to be darn sure, before we make that decision, we need to be absolutely certain that doing so would ultimately benefit that species.
And that's what I'm saying.
And
I agree with you, other than I'm going to, again, come back at you with this. Here's part of the problem. So who's trying to make this decision right now? Who is making that choice? It's not our wildlife professionals. It's not the people that should be making that decision. What you've got is Grijalva making that decision.
Right. Well, right now it's our wildlife professionals making that decision.
And the problem is the popular trend right now is this. You talked about the first ones. The popular trend, we could take away whether if you were going to wave your magic wand, do you think that the people that, proposed the Cecil bill, do you think they want to stop with Cecil? Or do you think that really what they'd like to do is just stop hunting? Because I would counter
I think
that what they
wanted
to
talked about the grizzly bear bill first.
Yeah, they could care, this idea that, we really care about
hunting.
Yeah, that we really care about whether or not an X number of bears are, The reality is they don't want to see bears hunted. They want to see wolves hunted. They probably don't want to see deer hunted. They don't want to see anything hunted. They think that, that is what you're really getting to here. So they're chipping away at the things that look the easiest, because Cecil looks the easiest, right?
You're not pushing back on me at there. I
because
agree with
grizzly
you.
bears look the easiest. But the reality is that it's people that do not accept the idea that anybody can make intelligent management decisions and use hunting as a tool to do that. They don't support that. And so you have this ideological bent that's really tough to negotiate with, because, here we are trying to say, like, hey, let's try and do the right thing. You and me and Mike, we're going to look at, and calculate, and we're going to base everything on logic and numbers. Well, these people don't care about logic and numbers. These people don't care.
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir here.
Okay.
I agree. Yeah. All I was trying to make the point of, my main point was just, I don't want people to think, oh man, Wilms is out there saying we should be killing a bunch of threatened species.
No.
Right? That's not what I'm getting at. So I think we're on the same page.
Yeah, we're going to arm wrestle after this, though.
But we're on the same page. But I did want to tell you my one exposure, the main exposure I've had in my legal profession to hunting in Africa, and how this all kind of came home to roost and helped me formulate my opinions on,
or failed to come home to roost, as the case may be.
Ooh, I like what you said there. Yeah. So when I was in private practice, and I won't give out, protect everybody here. We'll just tell a little story. I represented a guy who had gone to Africa on multiple occasions, had taken several trips. What he dreamt about since he was a kid. I mean, I'm talking, he had drawings that he'd done of this. Like when he was 12 years old in his room, he envisioned doing this. His dream was to go to Africa and to kill a lion.
To hunt a lion?
To hunt a lion. He wanted to hunt
Was he a dentist?
A lion. I'm not going to say profession or anything like that. But that was his dream. He wanted a lion. Right? And so he went to Africa on 3 different occasions, 21-day trips, 3 different 21-day trips, because he decided he didn't just want any lion. He had a very specific lion in mind. It wasn't Cecil.
Just so we're clear.
It's not like he'd taken a trip through a park.
Not the same guy.
That's the one I want. No, but he had in his head, he was willing to spend whatever it took. He didn't want to go to a place where they were raising lions and releasing them. He wanted to be hunting in a place where they had a robust, natural, wild population. And he killed a lion on his 3rd trip. And I should tell you, for those, and it sort of blew my mind. And this was a while ago. But do you have any idea how much money it costs to shoot a lion and to take 3 21-day trips to do that? I do.
What's the ballpark?
This is a ballpark 15 years ago.
Okay, 15 years ago.
About $150,000
per trip, or for the 3?
No, total for the 3 combined.
So when you're looking
it's now way more than that.
So for people that you're understanding, so why do these countries care? Think about that. That's $100,000 plus when an individual comes. That's coming into your economy in a place where people don't make the annual wages that we make.
Right.
Go ahead.
Right. So he succeeds on his 3rd trip there, and he gets it was the largest lion taken in Zimbabwe that particular year. They have, and they score these by skull size. Mm-hmm. Right? It was the largest lion taken in Zimbabwe that year. He had that along with parts from other animals that he got while he was out there. Because one of the things you have to do when you hunt a lion this way, at least the way he did, is you need bait. And so you had to, every few days, you had to kill another plains game animal to be bait for the lion. Mm-hmm. So he would keep the cape and horns of various things from that trip, or from those trips. Had them sent to a taxidermy studio, and because he was making multiple trips, they agreed to hold on to it. He wanted to do a big mount, big, not really a diorama, but he had a certain thing in mind. The way he wanted this animal to be, the taxidermy to be done. So they agreed to hold on to it for a while. Well, ultimately, they lost it.
The taxidermist
lost the lion.
Yeah, $150,000 worth of trips, and the taxidermist it's just gone like a lion.
Yeah,
just disappears.
And of course, I always get the question: how in the world do you lose a lion? How do you lose a lion? Right? Well,
filed it under kangaroo.
Right. Yeah. There's so much story that goes into
something else.
There's so much story that goes into all this. At one point, I had a crate sitting in my office full of animal parts that I was, going through to see.
That's not a lion.
With the inventory. That's not a lion. Check. Right. Ultimately, we wound up finding it. It hadn't been lost; it had been sold. But what I learned in this process, getting to know my client, when he was deposed about this experience, he sobbed, absolutely sobbed, and it wasn't for the loss of the money. I mean, it was that skin was having that animal.
That represented a lifelong dream.
The culmination of a lifelong dream, and it was gone, right? And he was incredibly emotional about it. He'd made incredible friendships and still kept in touch with and emailed all these folks in Zimbabwe. He made incredible friendships, and he had this enormous respect for the country and for the culture and for the wildlife there. But he was incredibly emotional about this, and it tied him back. It made him think about his mother and losing his mother, and there was just a whole host of stories around this. It was raw. It was emotion. We wound up finding it towards the end. The case ultimately ended. I'm not going to go into any of the details about that, but the case ultimately ended. And I told him that it was good that we didn't go to trial in this case. Right? We wound up figuring out
because about the time of Cecil, right?
Because about a month or so after we settled this case, the Cecil, the lion, that story broke. And I kept thinking, I told my client, I said, you know what? We would have won that case. It was open and shut. We had them admitting that they had lost it. It was liability was easy to prove. That was going to be no problem. Damages, on the other hand, were going to be much more difficult to prove in light of the public outcry. No pun intended. The public outcry over that Cecil case. Right. I kept telling him my prediction was if we had gone to trial after that Cecil case broke, that the jury, because they wanted a jury trial, and I don't blame them, I would have as well in this instance. They wanted a jury trial, and that jury would have come back and found the taxidermist liable for losing it and awarded $1 in damages. because the way the media spun that story and named that lion Cecil and vilified that person, that dentist, for doing what his personal hunter and guide told him to do, right? He didn't know that this was what lion this was, right? Because that happened, the media managed to
and then
turn the tide on that trophy hunting community, and it would have affected him.
Because when you get people to look at an individual and feel sorry for that thing, you can create a story and a very personal, it's different. They don't look at the population dynamics. And this plays out in our country. It's playing out right now on a number of fronts with wild animals. And I could, there are other areas where this is occurring right now where we're looking at, hey, what about this one? We saw one animal die. And then you go like, well, look at the entire population before you jump to a conclusion.
But that animal was so-and-so number.
Yeah, this is my favorite one. I took 3 pictures of him, but, I got one more. I got a funny story for you. You ready? Because I know we're getting to the end. My better half.
Yeah, I was going to tell you.
Oh, go ahead.
Right before you say that story, to wrap a bow around that Cecil piece.
Uh-huh.
So in that hearing, Grijalva's hearing on the Cecil lion bill, one of the witnesses was from Zimbabwe. Right? He was He was with the government of Zimbabwe. And he actually made a comment. Said, for the local people, Cecil was just an ordinary adult lion, which was not famous at all.
Yeah. It's just a lion. One of many.
Our media made Cecil famous.
You know you don't have a lot of in this country? Tigers. So my better half was working there was an issue where...
That's an interesting transition.
So there's this circus is taking, cruising across the U.S., lost a tiger. So some guy is working the dispatch in Texas somewhere, and the dispatch gets a call from somebody. And they're like, yeah, I'm at the interstate and we're at the off ramp. They're like, yeah. And they're like, yeah, there's a tiger. He's on the off ramp, and they're like, the dispatcher goes, yeah, what exactly does he look like? And the guy goes,
a tiger.
There you go. That's my story.
I like that. By the way, just real quick, thanks to Google for this piece of information. There are about 5,000 tigers in the United States.
There's one less after the deputy took care of that one.
It's an interesting factoid since you brought up tigers.
There you go.
I had a buddy in high school that his neighbor had a tiger in his backyard. Every once in a while, we'd be hanging out and you'd hear it. You go, "What was that?"
A tiger.
It scares the heck out of you. First time you hear it.
What's it look like?
It's a tiger.
So, according to some website that I haven't verified the facts of. Actually,
pretend that it's truth.
No, it's the World Wildlife Fund. Anyway,
aren't they wrestlers?
That's the Federation WW. I don't know.
McMahon?
World Wildlife Fund. Yeah, there might have been a lawsuit about that. I don't know. Yeah. One of the world's largest populations of tigers exists not in the wild, but in captivity in the United States. With an estimated 5,000 tigers, the U.S. captive tiger population exceeds the approximately 3,200 tigers in the wild.
I feel like that's almost the same thing you said like a couple minutes ago, only much longer.
I was just adding on the tigers in the wild
sounded
part.
More official.
It did sound more official. I wanted to say where the source came from, and it was just because you had said, you know what, there aren't a lot of in the United States? Tigers.
Apparently I was wrong.
Turns out there are more tigers than grizzly bears. To bring this full circle. You guys have anything else?
No.
Just beating this dead horse, huh?
It's dead.
Yeah.
On we go.
All right. So everybody, want to thank you all for tuning in here. Hey, if you have issues with these two bills, if you support them, whatever, reach out to Representative Grijalva's office and express your thoughts about these two bills we discussed tonight, the grizzly bear and the importation bill. Like I said, I don't think either one of them are going to go anyplace. In fact, that Cecil the Lion bill has fewer sponsors. Representatives, he's tried to introduce this, I think, or he has introduced this, I think, 3 different times. And the number of co-sponsors he gets each time decreases almost exponentially. I think right now there are 8 or 10 co-sponsors. The first time he did it, there were 50, something like that. So I think that one's losing momentum.
Yeah.
But still out there, and I thought it was worth having a conversation about.
I will say props to the groups that sent a letter opposing this. Groups like TRCP, groups like Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, any group that had, there's a AWCP, a bunch of those guys signed a letter, sent it to the chairman. This is not a joke, but what Dave is doing right now is... But some groups had the foresight to say this is a bad idea. And for those groups that didn't, that's okay. There's always next time.
There is. Just like there's next time for us, when you can rejoin us on another episode of the Your Mountain podcast. And until then, just remember that life is about experiences, so go have one.